Okay, well, we have had a pretty serious warning issued today, and this is right across the United Kingdom, that homeowners, residents should be prepared for blackouts. Now, we've heard this a lot over the last couple of years, and the data has been somewhat sporadic in its approach, but I've actually spent a lot of time going through the data, absolute so granular over the last week now, and I was going to talk about this in the coming weeks, but since we've just had, I'll tell you what this is, the UK blackout prevention system was just activated today. This is not a joke, absolutely serious. It was activated and they then turned it off. Now, it's quite interesting when you look at them turning it on and turning it off as to how they looked at that. So it was turned on with an automated system based on energy demand, on mathematics, on physics, etc. It was turned off based on emotions. Yes, people didn't feel as though it was probably accurate. No, they thought about it and they got opinions and they felt as though it was probably a mistake. This reminds me of the 2020 era. If we remember all the things that were going on there, it was all about feelings as opposed to a lot of the statistics that we talked about during those periods. So let's go over to this, and I'm going to show you all of the stats and all the data that I've grabbed for you as well here. So let's start with today's announcement that just came out. The blackout prevention system was activated today, and this is at the same time electricity demand is set to spike. So this was a capacity warning issued for the first time in 2 years as the grid battles what they're calling low winds and cold weather. Now, I've got to touch upon the cold weather first because this is absolute nonsense. It's just not true. This is the weather right now in the UK region. It's not cold. So why they are saying, oh, these plummeting, freezing temperatures, what temperatures? 12 degrees Celsius, 10 degrees Celsius. This is ridiculous. Obviously, absolute nonsense, the reason they're given. We're going to get into the real reason in this video, and you can probably guess what a lot of this is from. So this system that's designed to prevent blackouts was activated today. This so-called automatic notice for the capacity market, which issues a warning to the different generators, was issued by NESO just after midday today. So it told generators to be ready for when demand spikes at 4:30 p.m., which comes amid fears the amount of spare capacity had grown unacceptably small compared to demand. So we'll talk about this, then we're going to talk about 2027 and more importantly 2028, which is where it gets really scary. Moments after the notice was issued, they insisted it was confident that the margins were sufficient. So they said that, they thought about it and they decided just to turn it off. This was the first of its kind since 2022, and they said it was from low wind speeds and nuclear power outages. We're going to get into nuclear and the different sites as to what has been happening here, and it will all make sense. Catherine Porter, who is an independent energy analyst, said the likely causes this time around were lower than expected wind output, as well as greater than expected demand for electricity. Also, let's not forget the flowing outwards to Europe via the interconnectors. They sort of brush over that quite a lot. The warning comes after the Sizewell B nuclear power station in Suffolk temporarily shut down for refueling on Friday. What a coincidence. Wait until you see the nuclear stuff in a second. Yeah, I'll save it because it's the good stuff. We'll save it for a little while. The 1.2 gigawatt site is not expected to return to full capacity until December. Yes, December. They don't do it when the load is low on the requirements. No, they do it during winter when the requirements are high. That's great logic. And they say that the electricity market is looking very tight. Now, on Monday, so today at lunchtime, the data showed that gas power stations had been fired up to meet roughly 53%. Okay, let's just look at that a second. 53% of the electricity needs of the country. This is not 3%, 13%. This is 53%, with wind and solar providing just what? Can we all just see this? 10% each. So all this stuff they keep saying is nonsense. We are not where they have been claiming we are for all this time. CMN forecasts are issued automatically and only based on information in the public domain. They do not take into account all the factors which our engineers are working on. Now, I've actually read the full report on this, and that's where I sort of made the joke that it's based on emotion. Yes, emotion. Now, we can go through everything. We can go through the energy dashboard. We can see what is actually creating the 37 gigawatt generation at the moment. We also, and let's actually look at a couple of this. So they call this fossil fuels 52.7%. They do have renewables at 12.4%. Low carbon is at 13%, and then other is the other 22%. Well, the other is, you can see here, it's imports, it's biomass, etc. But this is nuclear here, by the way, this 13%. The low carbon is nuclear. Now, do you remember when they said they had to get rid of all the nuclear because they needed to hit their climate target for 2030? And I did that video and I broke it all down, analyzed it, and I said, this is nonsense. Nuclear produce, and you can fact check this, please do, because I know people often say this in the comments, oh, he's talking rubbish and garbage, stuff like that. Fact check this. Nuclear is the lowest output of CO2 of all the energy sources. It's probably, it's probably lower than solar and wind combined, especially if you take into account all the concrete pour and everything else, the materials used for it. Check this for yourself, please, because last time I said this, so many comments said, no, the BBC told me that nuclear is really bad and all this. CO2, it's not. There's other risk with nuclear, obviously, that we've had fallout and issues in the past, and what happened with Japan and the flooding and the reactor and stuff. There's other issues. I'm not saying there isn't, but the fact is, I'm talking about what the BBC is always saying. Oh, nuclear is so bad for carbon. It's not. It's a massive lie. They're just closing all of these nuclear reactors. I'm sorry to say, but that is the fact. So this is the gas component at the moment. Got 20 gigawatts here. And then just looking at the historical data then, this goes back to 2009. So remember, this is when we hit the last recession here. And you look at the generation that we had, and especially this is generation and CO2 emissions. So you can see here, we were in the 45 to 50 range. Look where we are now. And this is important in a second. We're sort of in the, what range here? 30? So we're down from sort of 40 to 45 down to 30. This will make perfect sense in a moment when I show you the correlation between GDP and energy. And then here, this is what they're saying about carbon. So CO2, carbon dioxide, right? They're saying that they need to get this down by at least 50%. Now, one thing I forgot to mention on the walk and talk on Friday, something really important, and that is that where we are at the moment, the 0.04% carbon dioxide levels, which even a lot of the experts, if you saw that video, they didn't know what the level was in the atmosphere. Oh, 5%, 8%, 10%, I'm just guessing, right? They didn't know themselves. Plant life begins to die off, so they want to reduce it by at least 50%. Just do this for yourself. Look at what percentage in the atmosphere plant life, all plant life on Earth begins to die. So you have a look, I won't even say on here, you have a look, and I think you'll be shocked. So pretty much if these whole targets around reducing it by 50% or more are hit, plant life on Earth would die. Look at this for yourself, please. I know people will say, oh, Neil's at it again. Let's go on to, I wanted to show you then this article, and then we'll go on to the correlations with GDP and energy production. So the age of energy rationing is looming for Britain, and this is as we go towards net zero here. So this was a warning that Ed Miliband did not want to hear. So this was days after the Energy Secretary pledged low carbon power for Labour's annual conference. Energy giant EDF discussed plans to close, look at this is probably the most important thing here, 4 of the 5 nuclear reactor power stations in the UK. You'll see why this is so important in a moment. Two are currently scheduled to close in 2026, followed by the other two in 2028. And they said that they can't go on forever. Any life extension of these power stations is going to be measured in months. In September, the country's last coal-fired power station closed its doors forever. And as Britain's reactor fleet shrivels, the amount of nuclear capacity will fall from 6 gigawatts today to just 1.2 gigawatts by 2028 or soon after, along with rising demand from power-hungry data centers and technologies of the future. It'll make it even harder to keep the lights on when wind and solar generation is low. And then they talk in a second about the households. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out here with all of this is that I know a lot of you have taken my recent course where I talked about business, entrepreneurship, and energy with AI for the future, and where there's a lot of potentials for massive growth and investment and business opportunity. If you remember those forecasts that I made in that course, the energy demand that we are going to have from now onwards is absolutely massive. It's huge. And the UK government keeps saying, and a lot of the businesses as well, the advisors, they're saying that they're trying to attract all of this new business, all these AI companies, robotics, tech, to the UK. I'll tell you why a lot of these companies will not come to the UK, and that's because the energy will not be here. The data centers alone, the demand, the pull on one data center is mind-boggling, the amount of power it needs. So if they're not going to have power for households, let's get back into this. Talks about rationing. A lot of already the system operator is turning to households and businesses to help them balance the system. Last week, it announced year-round plans to manage demand by paying consumers to cut their electricity use at times of tight supply. Critics are warning this is rationing. It's rationing, especially when electricity production continues to fall. And they're saying that this risks destabilizing Britain's grid, threatening jobs and businesses in the process. Meeting the net zero 2030, it's always 2030, target will be very expensive, present increased risks of blackouts and involve fudges. It's also likely that a significant demand side response would be needed. Significant, here we go, I'm going to jump onto the next point now. Significant adverse economic and welfare impacts. Energy rationing appears to be looming. Will the country tolerate it? Yes, the people will tolerate it, as they do tolerate most things, which is sad. So you can do a simple Google search here, okay? You can do a simple Google search. We don't need to do anything complex. And you can look at the correlation between GDP and energy. And you can look at, I'm going to pull some more equations and stuff in a minute, but an increase in GDP is associated with an increase in energy demand. At the same time, this correlation can be slightly influenced by the improvement of energy efficiency or the structural changes in individual economies from time to time. Right, and that's March 2023. So there's just been all these new studies. In fact, I won't go through the formulas and the equations, but unless you're really geeky and you want to know this stuff. But this is how we calculate this, the GDP T rate or the GRT rate. So you can look at that if you're interested. You can see the link on the top of the screen here. So let's just look at this. This is what all of these studies, going right back to Cleveland in 1984, this was based on the 1970s energy crisis. But you don't need to know all of this. All you need to know is this. Energy production is correlated almost perfectly with economic production. That is what all of this says without me reading it all out. There's Kraft and Kraft 78, there is Shabazz in 2018, Reza 2019. There's loads of these studies and they all say exactly the same thing. And that is that GDP, so your growth, all of us as a nation, our income, everything, the GDP is perfectly correlated to energy. But what's happened is energy has dropped in the UK. And it's looking as though that's going to continue because of all these campaigns where they say, oh, you know, if you use energy, you're a bad person, you're killing the planet, let alone what's going on in other side of the world. You look at China and India and all these other places. You look at their energy consumption, and it's not even green energy if you're, into all of that stuff, right? It's completely skewed. They don't even go into all of this. They act as if that stuff doesn't exist. So what's going to happen is the GDP of the country isn't going to grow. I forecast it's going to be stagnant to at least 2030. You might see 1% per year, but you're not going to see any more of that, because this is just mathematics, physics, it's logic, it's correlated. And this is the madness that people don't really understand. If you want to go onto the Gov website, you can look at all the statistics as well on energy consumption. But this is the truth then. I'll show you from a BBC News article. All of the projects worth billions are stuck on hold. Some solar and wind sites are waiting up to 10 to 15 years to be connected because of a lack of capacity in the system. This is the problem, 10 to 15 years. So all of this wind and all of this solar, even though it's not effective all the time, solar's not effective in winter, wind's not always effective when it's not blowing, they have actually created all these projects. There's thousands of these projects all over the place. The problem, which is the elephant in the room that they're not addressing, is that some moron, is the only way you can describe whoever was in charge of this project, they focused all this time and energy on building all this infrastructure, the projects, and then they didn't build the infrastructure to connect it to the grid. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It really is a sort of hand palm to the head on this. How on earth you can mess that stuff up? So now they're 10 to 15 years behind because they either forgot or they didn't focus on the connections from the projects to the grid. This is crazy. I mean, this is what we are, unfortunately, what we are dealing with now. We got the longest queues in Europe. 40% face a connection issue. 200 billion worth of projects are just sat there. 1,100 projects. Look at this. These are large-scale projects. They're just sat here. They're not connected because there's no connections to the grid. And then this is the really concerning things. Have you noticed all of these coming out? So the Gov is putting out stuff now about power cuts. We also have the British Red Cross has put this out about power cuts for UK citizens. E.ON, which is a big energy supplier, is what happens if there are nationwide planned emergency power cuts. This is all coming out right now, by the way. Power cuts or electricity outages can have a number of causes, including severe weather, which can lead to damage, infrastructure, or system faults, they're calling it. Gas boilers, hobs, your heat pumps, your internet, nothing will work without power. I'm pretty sure my gas hob does work without power, actually. I'll have to check that. I'm going to turn my power off and check it because I'm pretty sure my stove does work without it, but I'll check that. Mains water also will be disrupted, so they're telling you to keep a battery torch with spare batteries, bottled water, and then they're telling you this is really weird. Find out your power load block letter. And they're saying that this will be scheduled, look, read this, on a rotating area by area basis. Yes, it says it in black and white here. Emergency power cuts could be scheduled on a rotating area by area basis. Do you not find all of this really bizarre? And then we've got all these articles, blackouts, 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 blackouts. This is what it's all about. I'm sure I had all the stats on the... I wanted to show you the nuclear stats. I thought I had it. There are nuclear stats as well, which I guess I don't have. But in essence, then, let me just tell you about these nuclear stats. They are closing down the power stations, all the nuclear power stations. So what you've got is, it looks like this, the graph, and then it goes 2026, bang, there's almost nothing left. And it says 2028, one left. And that's the issue. They haven't got a way, when these connections are going to take up to 2032, 2033, they haven't got a way to fix this problem. Ladies and gents, it's not looking good. I'll tell you that. I could talk about this for a lot longer, but I've got to keep the stream short. Take care, God bless, and I'll see you on the next video on Wednesday.